Hey Patreon pals! Last month I asked you which video you would most like to see from me on YouTube in May, and it was a tie for the Instagram sticker tutorial and a Procreate lettering tutorial. So I thought, let me create the Instagram sticker tutorial for YouTube and let me create an updated lettering tutorial for you guys. So today I'm going to share with you some of my top tips for getting started with lettering in Procreate. First things first, I've opened up a blank canvas here in Procreate, and I'm going to show you one of my absolute favorite hacks for creating really clean lettering, especially if you are a beginner, but I still do this all of the time myself. And that is using the text tool in Procreate to create some lettering guides for yourself that you can trace around and create a base sketch from before you create your lettering. So we're going to tap on the toolbar up here at the top, and then we're going to select add text. First thing that I want to do is increase the size of it because I want to letter this nice and big. The second thing that I'm going to do is select a font that is nice and thick and clean for me to trace around. I usually use one of my brand fonts, which is called Outfit. There it is, because it has a really nice bold version of it where the letters are really, really thick. And it's also a royalty-free font, which means I can use it as a reference image without it being in violation of any copyright rules, which if you're using a font that you've downloaded from the internet, it's better to do it with a royalty-free font, even if you're just using it as a reference and a base layer to sketch around, just to be sure that you're not copying anybody's work that you haven't got the rights to use. The next thing that we're gonna do is increase the tracking a little bit because we want the space between the letters to be a little bit bigger to give us space to create outlines. And then the final thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna change the color of this text to black, and then I'm going to tap my little cursor tool here to go out of the text settings and just into the move and resize settings, and I'm going to place it to the center of my canvas. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger again, and now I am ready to start using this as a base to help me create my lettering. I'm going to tap on my layers menu, and then on my text layer I'm going to tap for the layer settings and just reduce the opacity way down. So we just have this little shadow in the background that we can work on top of. I'm setting it to about 12. You could even take it lower. You really just want it there as a guide, but just so that you can still see it in the video, I'm going to set it around 12. Then I'm going to close that setting, and then this blank layer, I'm going to move it above the text layer because this is where I'm going to start my sketching for my lettering. I'm going to grab my favorite sketch brush, which is called Sketch Brush, and I'm going to select a dark gray, which is to create my sketch layer for this text. Now all I'm going to do is zoom in close to the letters, and on that blank layer above my text layer, I'm going to start tracing around the lettering nice and loose. To create my own bubble lettering. You can use the text underneath as a guide, or you can do it exactly as it is. That's completely up to you. I like to add my own kind of style to the shape of the letters as I go, like with the E, for example. Sometimes I'll make letters a little bit wider or a little bit taller than they are in the base layer just to add my own creative style to it. The more that you practice this, the more you're going to figure out what your creative style is. Once I have traced around all of the letters for my sketch layer, again, this is my sketch layer, so it doesn't have to be perfect. You can see that some of my lines are actually quite messy and overlapping and not very neat, and that's fine. Now I'm gonna go back into my layers menu, and I'm gonna hide that text layer because I don't need it anymore, but just in case down later on as I'm working on the artwork, I decide actually I wanna come back to the beginning, I'm not gonna delete it just yet. I'm gonna leave it there. Now on my text layer, I want to rearrange some of these letters because all of this super straight, evenly spaced lettering is not my style. Maybe it's yours, but I like to play around with my letters. So I'm going to use the select tool with the freehand setting turned on, and I'm just going to select each of the letters and move them, rotate them, and make this word look a little bit more Laura Jane Illustrations. So I've even just slightly moved some of these letters and placed them closer together, but you can already see a big difference between what it looked like straight off me tracing versus now when I've started to add my own flair to it. Now that my sketch layer is done and I'm happy with the placement of my letters, the next thing that I would do is go back into my layers menu and reduce the opacity of my sketch layer just like I did with my text layer, and add a new layer above, grab an inking brush and start creating the final line art for my letters. Doing exactly the same thing that I did, using that sketch, tracing over it, adding color in where it needs to, and creating some really fun blocky letters. I also use a similar idea if I want to letter out a really long piece of text. So often for my Instagram posts, I will have like an illustration and then a quote underneath it. And I have in the past done some pretty big quotes, and that can get a little bit overwhelming when you're trying to letter all of that and make sure that it stays consistent in size. I've gotten better at freehanding it as the years have gone on, but sometimes even with a lot of practice at freehanding it and keeping things even size, there will be days where I just really struggle to keep my lettering even and consistent and cohesive. So I use exactly the same concept, but instead of using a bold font, I use a thinner text. So I'm going to create a new text layer, and this time using my font, I'm going to turn it to the thin version. I want the lines to be fine this time. And sometimes I even reduce the tracking a little bit so that the letters are closer together. And this time I don't want my text to be too big, so I'm going to reduce the size as well. So I'm going to type out a little sentence. This is a quote, just to give you guys an example. And then I'm going to do exactly the same thing that I did when I was doing the block lettering. I'm going to put it in the middle of my canvas. And I'm going to reduce the opacity so that it's like this little shadow on the canvas. I'm going to add a new layer above it. And this time I'm going to grab my favorite inking brush, which is the script brush. I'm going to turn it down in size. Let's just test if that's a good size. It is. And now I'm going to zoom right into my text, just like the last time. And this time, again, I'm going to use this text as a guide to help me letter out this sentence. But I'm not going to be tracing over the letters. I'm really going to try and use my own handwriting, just using the text layer underneath as a guide to help me keep the size and placement of letters and words consistent. Okay, I've lettered over my text guide, and you can see this is in my lettering style. It looks absolutely nothing like the font that I used as the guide, but what the font has allowed me to do is keep the letters relatively consistent in size. Obviously, part of my style of lettering is having that slight variation in letters and then not always having them sitting on the baseline in the same place together. They do kind of like go up and down a little bit. They are relatively consistent in size, and also the space between words is the same, and this is really helpful if I'm trying to letter out quite a long piece of text. And then the same sometimes once I've lettered it out, I'm not really happy with the spacing between individual letters or words, and I'll use the select tool to play around with that. The other added benefit to using text underneath for lettering out sentences like this is spelling and grammar check. If you followed me for a while on Instagram, you know that every so often I will post a beautiful piece of artwork and have completely overlooked a spelling error or a missing word inside it. I literally did it recently for our Wallpaper Wednesday. One of my favorite wallpapers that I was so obsessed with was supposed to say better days are coming, but I uploaded it and it said better day are coming. And it took me like 5 hours to realize that I'd made that error. Because at least for me, when I am like focused on illustrating and creating a design or creating lettering, I'm not thinking about the spelling and I don't see the spelling and grammar errors. I have the idea in my head of what I want to say, and I'm pretty sure that what I'm lettering is saying that, but sometimes little things slip by. So when I'm lettering a large piece of text, another reason that I like to use the text tool as a base layer is to make sure that I don't make any of those silly little spelling or grammar mistakes that I might make if I just completely freehand letter it, because autocorrect is going to correct that as I'm typing it out in the text, and then I have that guide to focus on so I can concentrate on designing the shape of the letters and not the actual text. My third and final tip for getting started with lettering on Procreate, if you don't want to use a text layer guide and you just want to start freehanding your lettering a little bit more, not relying on something to trace, then your next best friend is going to be your canvas guides. So I'm going to get rid of all of this text that I've already created, and I'm going to tap on my settings up here. I'm going to tap on my canvas settings, and then I'm going to toggle on the drawing guides. And here I have a lovely grid that I can work on to create my letters and help me keep the size of the letters consistent and evenly spaced as well because of the grid. The other benefit to using the grid is you can adjust the grid. So if you have something that you want to make the lettering really small for, you can tap on Edit Drawing Guide and you can use this grid size toggle down here on the bottom to make the grid smaller. Equally, if you are creating a piece of text or bubble lettering and you want your letters to be bigger and you don't want to be looking at a lot of teeny tiny squares, you can toggle this right up and use bigger grid guides for your sizing. You can also play around with things like the thickness of your grid, the opacity of how visible or not you want it to be on your canvas as you're working with it. And then you can also change the color of the grid. So if you've already decided on the background of your artwork and you want to choose a better, more contrasting color so you can easily see your grid over your artwork, then you can change the color of the grid. And that's it. Those are my top 3 tips for getting started with lettering in Procreate. I know that they are super simple features, but sometimes the simple things are the best things to help us build up our skill and get more consistent with our designs, and also to help us focus on finding our artistic style rather than having to focus on style and sizing and spacing and all of that at the same time. It can definitely get overwhelming. If you enjoyed this little mini Procreate tutorial, be sure to click the thumbs up button on YouTube to give it a like. You can also click the heart if you're watching on Patreon to give it a like there. And I would love to know what other lettering tips you would like to learn, or what other Procreate tutorials you would like to see. So go ahead and leave a comment either on YouTube or on the Patreon feed directly to let me know what you would like to learn about lettering or Procreate next. And I will see you in next month's video.